After 12 days, the 30th Conference of Parties on Climate Change, or COP30, wrapped up on Saturday, on November 22nd at Belém in Brazil. Over these 12 days, a lot has happened. Before I get to the main outcomes, here's a quick recap. Like The Wire reported previously, indigenous peoples protested at the COP30 venue and Belém city to draw attention to deforestation and the impacts of industries. New analyses on fossil fuels and emissions showed that the expected temperature rise due to global warming may have decreased from 3.6 to around 2.6 degrees Celsius by 2100. But we are still far, far away from our goal to limit it to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. A major fire broke out in the COP30 venue on November 20th, where the negotiations were happening. Fortunately, no one was hurt, though 13 people had to be treated for smoke inhalation. The venue was closed down for a few hours, and this stalled negotiations temporarily. But it will take more to douse the spirit of COP30, as Soumashree Sarkar said, reporting from Belém.
Hi, this is Soumashree from Belém in Brazil. The news of the fire at the COP30 venue has added drama and set forth some familiar blame games. In the background is the fact that Belém, which is at the mouth of the vast Amazons, was a tricky choice to pull off an event of this scale. Over the last few weeks, over 56,000 diplomats, journalists, activists, and staff have been gathering at the venue at the Parque da Cidade. Belém as a town is smaller than the bustling metropolises of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. There have been umpteen reports, most by Western media, on its alleged unpreparedness to host an event of this scale. Daily rains have added to the challenge of the organizers, causing occasional leaks in the tents. At other times, the oppressive heat renders the air conditioning less than effective in what is an inescapable metaphor for the climate crisis. World leaders, including the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, have found it rather easy to trash on Belém. He said after returning to Germany that he was glad to have left Belém and claimed that the German journalists had also told him as much. But all of this appeared to fade into the background as Brazil unfurled its extraordinary beauty and variety at COP30. Hosting COP30 in the Amazon has symbolized the diplomatic recognition of the region's importance as the home of the world's largest tropical rainforest. It has driven the crisis of climate change home. For Belém's residents, the COP is a point of pride and joy, and I'll be loath to find a single person who has attended COP30 to attest otherwise. Belém now enters the legions of cities like Paris, Glasgow, and Baku, which lend their names to some of the most key efforts to put climate change into action. It has also seen important, emphatic, and politically loud protests from the indigenous people and climate activists from around the world. Having spent the past few days at Belém, I can also say that it will take a lot more than a fire to singe the city's pride, and a lot more than afternoon showers to douse the fervor of the climate talks here. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumashree. And of course, the negotiations themselves, which are the crux of the conference. Countries and their representatives engaged in intense discussions that even stretched into nights on some of these days. They spoke about money, of rich nations paying up much needed funds to poorer and developing countries to help them deal with climate change. They spoke about renewable energy, the importance of more accessible technology, gender, protecting rainforests, and more. And they haggled on how to weave these into what are called agreement texts. These texts are important because it is based on these that nations then promise to take up additional steps to tackle climate change, whether it is cutting down on emissions or switching to renewable energy faster and so on. This is to try and achieve the Paris Agreement and limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. The conference stretched on for an extra day because of lack of agreement between member parties on several aspects. These included disagreements on identifying indicators to measure the implementation of adaptation actions, on phasing out fossil fuels completely, and more. Then finally, at around noon on Saturday at Belém, the COP30 president gavelled several texts that member parties agreed on. Here are the 5 main outcomes from COP30. One of the most important decisions agreed on was the global Muchirao text. It brought together important issues that were not on the formal agenda, like climate finance, climate ambition, and so on. Another text, the Belém political package, listed agreements about implementing funding on losses and damages, among other things. Many of these texts also provided details of the launch of new programs to further streamline processes, like the Global Implementation Accelerator in the Global Muchirao text, or the launch of the Belém Gender Action Plan under the Belém political package. Phasing out fossil fuels is still not part of the main Muchirao text. This was something that some countries, including the European Union, wanted. But several countries, and this includes many oil and coal producing countries, including India, refused to bring in fossil fuel phase outs into the language. So, in a valiant attempt to bring in reference to fossil fuels, Brazilian COP30 President Dolago instead unveiled two roadmaps in the closing ceremony on November 22nd. One was to halt and reverse deforestation, and another was to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. However, these roadmaps are voluntary and not binding on any member party. But more talk of phasing out fossil fuels is on the cards. The COP presidency announced on the final day that the first international conference for the phase out of fossil fuels will take place in April in Colombia. Countries agreed to mobilize more money, at least 1.3 trillion USD annually by 2035 for climate finance, specifically adaptation. This involves doubling adaptation finance by 2025 and tripling it by 2035. This is still a delay by 5 years. Adaptation finance refers to funds needed to implement adaptation actions, which are measures to help people adapt to the impacts of climate change, such as installing early warning systems to better predict intense rains or droughts. Countries also agreed on a list of 59 indicators to measure the implementation of adaptation actions as part of the global goal on adaptation. Of course, this came with a lot of dissent on the final day of COP30 in the plenary session. But Dr. Chandni Singh, a scientist with the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, who has also co-authored reports published by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says it was encouraging that countries agreed on these indicators. She told The Wire that given that India's progress reports, which are the Biennial Transparency Report, the National Adaptation Plan, and its updated NDC, are yet to be submitted, it will be important for us to apply these indicators to any national reporting. The document also contextualizes these indicators to the needs and priorities of countries, which is important, she added. Overall, reactions about outcomes of COP30 are mixed and show a very clear divide between the global south and the global north. The European Union on Sunday expressed unhappiness about the main outcomes from COP30, calling the progress slow and insufficient. India, on the other hand, said it was satisfied about many outcomes from COP30. In a press statement a day after the conference ended, India appreciated the progress made under the Global Muchirao text, the progress made about adaptation, climate finance, just transition, and more. India also said that climate change mitigation, or taking actions to reduce the causes of global warming, such as reducing emissions intensities by decreasing the use of fossil fuels, should not fall on the shoulders of those who have the least responsibility in causing the problem. India here was referring to the carbon emissions that developed countries have already emitted in the past, contributing in a huge way to the problem of climate change. Many also said that COP30 showed the importance and victory of multilateralism, even though the US was not part of the climate conference this year. The US, which backed out of the Paris Agreement after President Donald Trump came into power again, is one of the biggest carbon emitters. But ultimately, one thing is certain. The COP, which just concluded, shows that the world still has a long, long way to go to bring greenhouse gas emissions under control and to limit global warming and climate change. Will developed countries hold their promise to give more climate funds? Will India finally submit its already delayed progress reports? There's a lot to look out for before the next COP begins at Turkey next year.